It all started with a phone call no one ever expected. A 911 call that tore open the calm, controlled image the Plaths had spent years presenting to the world. For a family that built its reputation on unity, faith, and discipline, that moment was the crack that exposed everything simmering beneath the surface. The question wasn't only about what happened during that call, but why it happened, and how it changed the family forever. Hi friends, I'm Sarah, and welcome back to Sister Wives Chapter. If you love reality TV breakdowns and commentary, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I want to know where you stand on this one. From the very first season of Welcome to Plathville, the Plath family stood out because they didn't live like most modern families. Kim and Barry Plath introduced themselves as proud parents of 9 children, raising them on a remote farm in Georgia, away from mainstream influences. No television, no sugar, no smartphones, no social media. It was the kind of environment that made people curious, almost like stepping into another era. On the surface, the family seemed perfectly aligned, happy, obedient children, strict but loving parents, and a lifestyle built on purity and simplicity. But television has a way of peeling back layers, and it didn't take long before cracks started to show. Kim, in particular, became the central figure. She was the mother who claimed she was willing to sacrifice anything for her kids, the one who wanted to shelter them from outside corruption. She stood as the matriarch with firm control over her children's education, diets, hobbies, and even friendships. To many viewers, she came across as devoted, but also rigid, often leaving little room for individuality. Barry, by contrast, seemed quieter. He worked full-time as a transportation planner, often presenting himself as steady and soft-spoken, but not as forceful as Kim when it came to family rules. That difference in parenting styles began surfacing early in the series. Where Kim was blunt and sometimes confrontational, Barry leaned toward patience. On camera, you could see moments when he tried to smooth things over, but it was Kim who almost always had the last word. And yet, it wasn't only about differences in tone. The show revealed more tension over time. Viewers saw disagreements about how much independence the older children should be given. Mariah, with her bold style and artistic personality, wanted freedom to express herself. Ethan, married to Olivia, was already clashing with his parents about boundaries and control. Micah, too, was pushing away from the sheltered upbringing. These conflicts weren't small, and they weren't isolated. They were evidence of a family struggling to hold together under rules that no longer fit the world their children wanted to live in. For a while, Kim managed to maintain her image of authority. She continued speaking about her choices as though they were guided by faith and love, insisting that her way was the right way, even when her kids disagreed. But under the surface, frustrations were building. By the time her marriage with Barry began to fracture, the family's story was no longer about unity. It was about conflict, rebellion, and power. And that's where the 911 call comes in. Because as the show unfolded, this moment became the symbol of everything collapsing. It wasn't simply a call for help. It was a turning point that changed how fans, and even her own children, would see Kim from that day forward. And this is where I want you to stay with me. Because the details of what happened during and after that call are the very heart of how the Plath family's world fell apart. When you look at the lead-up to that incident, it's almost like the family was living on a fault line. Every disagreement between Kim and Barry was another crack in the foundation. Every time the children resisted their parents' rules, the tension grew sharper. Barry tried to hold things together quietly, but Kim's methods were drawing sharper criticism, both inside and outside the family. The way she disciplined the kids, the way she spoke over Barry in certain scenes. And the way she clashed with Olivia all painted a picture of a woman unwilling to release control. To Kim, loosening her grip meant losing everything. And in her eyes, that was not an option. But the irony of control is that the tighter you hold on, the more things slip through your fingers. And by the time she and Barry were headed toward divorce, the battle lines were drawn. It was no longer just about parenting. It was about power, about image, and about who the children would ultimately side with. So when that 911 call happened, it was like the breaking point everyone had been bracing for. This wasn't an argument behind closed doors. This wasn't a disagreement that could be edited to look harmless. It was raw, undeniable, and very public. And the truth is, once that call was made, nothing about the Plath family could ever go back to the way it was before. If Act 1 showed us the first crack in the foundation of the Plath family, Act 2 is where we see that fracture split wide open. Because once the cameras started capturing not only Kim and Barry's differences but also their children's rebellion, the world saw a family divided right down the middle, between control and independence, between the image Kim wanted to project and the truth her kids were finally ready to tell. From the very beginning, Kim and Barry represented two ends of a spectrum. Barry was the quiet, steady father who, at least outwardly, tried to keep the peace. Kim was the one who laid down the rules. Together, they enforced a lifestyle that kept their 9 children away from television, internet, sugar, and even friendships outside their small circle. To outsiders, it might have looked like unity, but to the kids, especially the older ones, it was suffocating. The Plath children weren't blind. They saw other families. They saw peers living lives with freedom and choice. And the older they got, the harder it became to accept the control their mother demanded. Mariah was the first to truly break away. Bright, bold, and outspoken, she didn't just want freedom, she needed it. Her sense of style, her music, her desire to live authentically were in direct conflict with the restrictive environment at home. On screen, viewers watched her grow from a frustrated teenager into a young woman determined to live her own life. And while Barry sometimes tried to empathize, it was clear Kim saw Mariah's independence as rebellion, something to be managed, corrected, or shut down. Micah wasn't far behind. He too wanted to explore life outside of the family's strict bubble. Modeling, new friendships, a more modern lifestyle, Micah was chasing experiences that Kim couldn't control. For him, breaking away wasn't just about freedom. It was about discovering who he was without the constant oversight of his mother. And then came Ethan. His situation was far more complicated. Married to Olivia, he became the lightning rod for one of the most explosive conflicts the show had ever seen. Olivia, outspoken and independent, refused to follow Kim's rules. She wasn't raised to accept authority blindly, and she had no interest in being molded into the daughter-in-law Kim envisioned. For Olivia, being around the Plath family meant walking into a power struggle every single time. Kim and Olivia clashed almost immediately. Whether it was over family traditions, boundaries, or influence over Ethan, the tension was undeniable. And Ethan, caught between his wife and his parents, faced an impossible choice. To stand with Olivia meant defying the family system he had grown up in. To stand with Kim and Barry meant betraying the woman he loved. That conflict wasn't just painful. It was the perfect storm that revealed just how fragile the Plath family's perfect image really was. And this is where I need you to stay locked in with me. Because what comes next shows just how far Kim was willing to go to hold on to control, even as her children were fighting to break free. As the children's independence grew, Kim's grip tightened. But here's the paradox. The tighter she held, the more they slipped away. The more she lectured, the more they resisted. And the more she tried to maintain authority, the more obvious it became that her control was unraveling. In season after season, viewers saw Kim try to reframe herself as the devoted mother who was simply misunderstood. But her own kids' reactions told a different story. They weren't rejecting faith or family. They were rejecting her version of both. Mariah wore what she wanted. Micah moved out. Ethan drew a hard line in the sand. And Olivia, refusing to back down, became the outsider Kim seemed determined to villainize. The tension escalated into family gatherings that turned into confrontations. Conversations that should have been about reconciliation became standoffs. Barry, though present, often faded into the background while Kim tried to command the narrative. And yet, the more she insisted on being right, the more alienated her children became. What viewers were seeing wasn't just typical parent-child conflict. It was a complete unraveling of authority. Kim had spent years controlling every detail of her children's lives, from what they ate, to what they watched, to who they spoke to. But now that they were adults, she couldn't stop them. And watching that loss of control play out on national television made it impossible for her to hide behind her curated image. The tension with Olivia and Ethan was perhaps the most visible. Ethan's decision to step back from his parents wasn't just about boundaries. It was a declaration of independence that shook the entire family system. And Olivia, often accused of being the one driving the wedge, became the scapegoat for Kim's frustration. But fans saw it differently. They saw Olivia giving Ethan the courage to stand up to the control he had lived under his entire life. By this point, the Plath family wasn't united. It was fractured. You had Mariah and Micah openly siding with independence. You had Ethan and Olivia refusing to back down. And you had Kim still fighting to keep her authority, even as her marriage to Barry crumbled. But here's the thing. When a family fractures like this, the ones caught in the middle are always the most vulnerable. The younger children, still under Kim and Barry's roof, were watching all of this unfold. They saw their siblings walk away. They saw the fights, the tension, the 911 call. And though they didn't have the same freedom to choose sides, they were the ones most directly impacted by their mother's decisions. And that's where this story turns. Because while the adult children could walk away and build new lives, the younger ones couldn't. They were still under Kim's control, still living in the shadow of her authority, and still carrying the weight of choices they didn't make. But nothing prepared the kids for the way Kim's decisions would soon affect the most vulnerable members of the family. If Act 2 gave us the slow burn fracture inside the Plath family, Act 3 delivers the moment when everything combusted into a full-blown emergency. The infamous 911 call that shocked viewers, rattled the children, and left the audience questioning what they had just witnessed. Because while family arguments had been brewing for years, this was different. This was a scene that blurred the line between reality television and real-life crisis, a moment where panic, suspicion, and heartbreak collided right before the cameras. It started quietly, almost deceptively. There had been arguments before. Kim and Barry had fought in front of the cameras before. But this was something else. The tension was heavier, the atmosphere darker. The kids sensed it. Viewers sensed it. And then suddenly chaos erupted. Kim was on the phone, her voice rising. The words, "We need help," hanging in the air as the camera caught flashes of movement. Children frozen in confusion, and Barry's face registering both alarm and disbelief. The 911 operator's calm tone contrasted sharply with the panic pouring out of Kim's mouth. She painted a picture of emergency, of immediate danger, and the cameras, though limited in what they could capture, gave just enough to leave fans piecing together the story later. Viewers weren't just watching an argument anymore. They were watching a family crisis escalate into something bigger than anyone expected. For the audience at home, the images were chilling. A mother dialing 911 in her own home, children standing by, some wide-eyed, some looking away, as if unsure of how to react. And Barry, calm, steady, almost eerily composed, trying to ground the moment. His frustration was visible, his attempts to shield the kids from the panic undeniable. But it was clear. Whatever Kim's motives were, this was no longer about resolving conflict. It was about escalation. And let me pause here, because this is where you need to stay with me. What happened during those few minutes wasn't just about a phone call. It was about power, perception, and the way a single act can change the trajectory of an entire family. From Kim's side, the call could be framed as the act of a mother who felt cornered, desperate, maybe even fearful. That's certainly how she wanted it to look. Her voice cracked at just the right moments, her tone swinging between urgent and trembling. But for many viewers, the performance felt off. Something about her body language, her insistence on painting Barry as the threat, raised red flags. Was this genuine fear? Or was this a calculated move in a much larger game? Barry's reaction only deepened the questions. He didn't lash out. He didn't lose his temper. Instead, he did what many fathers in his position would do. He tried to keep the children calm. He urged them to stay put, reassured them with his presence, and waited for the flashing lights that were already on their way. If Kim was expecting an outburst that would justify her accusations, she didn't get it. What viewers saw was a father standing still, quietly absorbing the chaos as his children clung to him for reassurance. When authorities arrived, the situation became even more complicated. Child Protective Services, CPS, was notified. Standard procedure when children are present during a domestic 911 call. And just like that, the private cracks in the Plath family had become a public case file. For the kids, the presence of strangers in uniforms was terrifying. Some were old enough to understand what it meant. Others just felt the fear of the unknown. Would they be taken away? Would their family split apart even more? The cameras couldn't capture every word, but the fear in the children's eyes told the story loud and clear. Barry, though angry at Kim's actions, kept his composure. To him, this wasn't just about defending himself. It was about making sure CPS saw a stable parent in the room. Kim, however, leaned further into her narrative, emphasizing her concern, gesturing toward the children as though to highlight their vulnerability. It was a performance within a performance, and the audience at home couldn't look away. The fallout was swift. CPS involvement meant investigations, interviews, and oversight. It meant the family's private conflicts were no longer theirs alone. They were subject to state scrutiny. And for a family already crumbling under the weight of divorce and rebellion, this intervention cut deeper than anyone expected. The children, caught in the middle, were forced to process adult conflicts they never asked for. For Mariah and Micah, the call was confirmation of everything they had feared about their mother's need for control. For Ethan, already torn between his wife and his parents, it was another fracture in his relationship with Kim. And for the younger kids, the ones too small to voice their confusion, it was trauma disguised as procedure. Fans watching at home were divided. Some sympathized with Kim, believing her panic was genuine, that she was truly afraid in that moment. Others were convinced the call was staged, a manipulative act designed to paint Barry as the aggressor and position herself as the protective parent. Either way, the effect was the same. The 911 call became the line in the sand, the point of no return in the Plath family saga. And Barry? He never forgot it. To him, this wasn't just about custody or reputation, or even the cameras rolling in the background. It was about trust, and the fact that the woman he had shared his life with was willing to weaponize fear, their children's fear, to get what she wanted. That betrayal, more than anything, cemented the end of their marriage and the end of any illusion that this family could be pieced back together. The children, too, carried the weight of that day. Every custody hearing, every whispered conversation about who they wanted to live with, was shadowed by that moment, the sound of their mother's voice calling 911, the sight of strangers entering their home, the knowledge that their lives were being judged and measured by people outside their family. The cameras may have only captured fragments of the chaos, but the impact was undeniable. For the Plaths, that single phone call became a symbol. For Kim, it was the act she couldn't take back. For Barry, it was proof of the lengths she would go to. And for the children, it was a scar. A reminder that in their parents' war, they were the ones stuck in the crossfire. The 911 call may have been over in minutes, but its shadow stretched over every decision that followed. If the 911 call was the spark that lit the fire, Act 4 is the moment the blaze spread uncontrollably, and this time, it wasn't confined to the Plath household. It spilled onto television screens, across social media, into fan discussions and commentary channels. Suddenly, Kim's carefully crafted image as the devoted mother was colliding head-on with the reality the world was seeing on Welcome to Plathville. For years, Kim presented herself as the picture of maternal sacrifice. She gave interviews describing herself as a woman devoted to her children, raising them with purpose and protection in a world she deemed too corrupt and too dangerous. In those early seasons, some fans bought it. They saw the idyllic farm, the barefoot kids running through fields, the music nights in the living room, and thought, maybe this was wholesome. Maybe this was different. But television has a way of revealing more than anyone intends. And after the 911 call, viewers began piecing together the inconsistencies, the cracks in the portrait Kim painted. Clips were rewound, slowed down, shared online. Fans compared her words with her actions, her explanations with the raw footage. And the verdict was harsh. The mother who once seemed devoted now appeared manipulative, calculating and desperate to control a narrative that was slipping away from her grasp. Barry, by contrast, didn't have to say much at all. His quiet resilience became his loudest statement. On screen, he was measured, composed, steady, even when provoked. He didn't fight fire with fire. He didn't raise his voice in front of the kids. He didn't try to spin his story with drama. He simply stood, often in the background, embodying the role of stability while Kim unraveled. And audiences noticed. In fact, it became a running theme in fan discussions. Barry's calm became proof of credibility, while Kim's chaos became proof of guilt. And I need you to catch this, because this is where perception became power. Reality TV is as much about the audience's interpretation as it is about the footage. And in the court of public opinion, Kim was losing fast. Social media lit up. Reddit threads, Facebook groups, YouTube commentary channels. Everywhere you looked, fans were debating Kim's motives, her parenting style, her relentless grip on authority. Many compared her devoted mom image to what they now saw as control tactics, isolating her kids, dismissing their independence, framing herself as the victim whenever challenged. Mariah and Micah's voices only added to the shift. On camera, they spoke about their need for independence, their exhaustion with the rules, their refusal to bend to their mother's authority anymore. These weren't rebellious teens acting out for the cameras. These were young adults articulating, with clarity, the suffocation they had lived under. Every word they spoke chipped away at Kim's credibility. Every time they chose freedom, viewers saw another piece of her authority crumble. Mariah, especially, became symbolic of the break. Her boldness in speaking out, in defining her own life, in refusing to be silenced, became a rallying cry for fans who had once been silenced by controlling parents themselves. "I see myself in Mariah," one fan wrote online. "Kim doesn't realize she's proving her kids right every time she tries to pull them back in." Micah's path, though different, echoed the same theme. His modeling career, his move out of the house, his insistence on living his own life without interference. These were acts of defiance, yes, but more importantly, they were acts of survival. And every photo shoot, every independent decision became a mirror reflecting Kim's loss of power. Meanwhile, Ethan and Olivia's storyline amplified the collapse even further. Their marriage struggles, much of it rooted in the tension with Kim, were painful to watch, but they also made Kim's tactics glaringly obvious. The harder Kim pushed, the further Ethan withdrew. The more she tried to control, the more Olivia stood her ground. And viewers, once skeptical of Olivia, began rallying behind her as the daughter-in-law who dared to challenge the matriarch. Kim didn't help herself either. Every attempt she made to present herself as the wronged parent backfired. Her words no longer matched the reality viewers had seen unfold. Her explanations seemed like excuses. Her insistence on being misunderstood sounded hollow when compared to the very real, very raw accounts of her children. Barry, on the other hand, barely needed to speak. His quiet presence, calm in courtrooms, steady in family discussions, composed in interviews, became the counterweight to Kim's chaos. Viewers connected with him because he didn't appear to be acting. He wasn't scrambling for control. He was simply there, showing up for his kids, showing up for himself, showing up in the only way he knew how. Steady, resilient, unwavering. By this point, Kim's public image wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. Fans who once sympathized with her began to turn. The narrative she had spent years cultivating, that of the selfless mother holding a family together, was being rewritten in real time by her own children, by the footage, by the fans who refused to ignore what they saw. And here's the brutal truth. In reality television, once public opinion turns, there is no going back. Every gesture, every word, every scene is filtered through the lens of distrust. Kim's sighs became manipulations. Her tears became performances. Her parenting became power plays. The cracks had widened into fractures, and the fractures were now a full collapse. The irony was devastating. For years, Kim worked tirelessly to control the story, to keep her kids sheltered, to dictate what they could and couldn't do, to curate an image of perfection for the cameras. And yet, the very platform she believed would cement her legacy ended up exposing the reality she tried hardest to hide. And here's where I'll keep you with me, because if the public fallout was brutal, it was nothing compared to what came next behind closed doors. For Kim, the family slipping away was bad enough. Watching her children choose freedom over her authority was humiliating. Watching Barry win the audience's empathy was infuriating. Watching her public image disintegrate in real time was unbearable. But what came next shattered everything she had built. By the time the fallout from the 911 call settled, the Plath family was no longer a single unit. The fracture lines had spread through every relationship, and the children, once expected to stand in unison under Kim's authority, were starting to make their choices. And for Kim, those choices cut deeper than any court ruling ever could. Ethan and Olivia were the first to step firmly out of her reach. Their marriage had already been tested by Kim's interference, by the endless tug-of-war between independence and control. But the 911 call and the storm it unleashed seemed to harden their decision. They wanted distance. They wanted peace, and peace meant cutting ties with Kim. On the show, you could see Ethan wrestle with the weight of that decision. He loved his family, but he was exhausted. Exhausted from the manipulation, exhausted from defending Olivia, exhausted from being pulled into conflicts he never asked for. Viewers could hear it in his voice and see it in his body language. Ethan was done being the son who obeyed no matter what. Olivia stood by him steady in her resolve. She was clear, calm, and unwilling to bend anymore. For Kim, this was an open wound. The son she once expected to stand at her side had chosen a different home, a different allegiance. And she couldn't control him anymore. And if you've been following this family, you know this was a turning point. Because once one child breaks away, others start to see the cracks in the system too. Mariah's journey was perhaps the most emotional of all. From the very beginning, she had been the one labeled rebellious, the daughter who dared to dress differently, sing louder, demand freedom. But her rebellion wasn't reckless. It was survival. As the custody tensions rose, Mariah's feelings toward her mother grew more complicated. She loved Kim, but she no longer trusted her. And that lack of trust weighed heavy. In several emotional moments on the show, Mariah made it clear she could not keep living under the same roof, following the same rules, pretending the same story. She wept. She raged. She spoke with the raw honesty of a daughter who had tried to love her mother but could no longer overlook the pain. For the audience, these weren't just dramatic scenes. They were heartbreaking truths of a child caught between loyalty and freedom. Then there was Micah. His path was less emotional on the surface, but equally telling. He didn't cry or plead. Instead, he acted. He moved out, carved a career for himself, and refused to let Kim dictate his future. Independence was his rebellion, and it spoke volumes. Viewers saw him thrive in new spaces, taking modeling jobs, building friendships, tasting life outside of the restrictions of his childhood. Every step he took away from the family farm was another signal that Kim's grip was gone. Together, Ethan, Olivia, Mariah, and Micah painted a picture Kim couldn't deny. Her authority was collapsing, and her children were building lives without her. And this is where the betrayal cuts through. Because for years, Kim framed herself as the protector, the one shielding her children from a dangerous world. But after the 911 call and its fallout, the kids no longer saw protection. They saw control, manipulation, and risk. When a mother's actions place her children in harm's way, even unintentionally, the illusion of safety is broken forever. Episodes captured moments when the kids openly questioned Kim's judgment. They didn't tiptoe around her authority anymore. They asked blunt questions, they pushed back on her narratives, and they refused to play roles in a story they no longer believed in. Fans remember those scenes: tense family dinners, tearful confrontations, sharp silences where love should have been. They were watching not only a family divided, but children redefining their roles in real time. And here's what made it worse for Kim. It wasn't just rebellion for the sake of independence. It was rebellion rooted in betrayal. The kids felt that the mother who once promised safety had become the source of chaos. They felt that the one person who should have protected them had chosen control instead. And once that realization set in, the shift was permanent. For the audience, it was devastating to watch. To see children distance themselves not out of immaturity, but out of necessity. To see love still present, but so entangled with hurt that reconciliation felt almost impossible. And to see Kim, once so commanding, now standing in a space where her children's trust was no longer guaranteed. Because here's the truth you can't escape. When children stop seeing you as their protector, what's left? If Kim's unraveling was loud and chaotic, Barry's presence was the exact opposite. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't dramatic, and he didn't demand attention. On Welcome to Plathville, Barry came across as steady, almost predictable. A man who went to work, who showed up for his children, who carried himself with calm even when the world around him was cracking. And that steadiness, in the middle of all the family turmoil, began to look like strength. Viewers had always seen Barry as the quieter parent. In earlier seasons, he was often in the background, letting Kim lead conversations, letting her frame the rules, letting her explain the family's choices. But as Kim's grip loosened and her control tactics became harder to ignore, Barry's quiet ways began to stand out. His restraint looked like dignity, his silence looked like patience, and his focus on keeping the family functioning gave him an authority Kim was rapidly losing. Episodes showed Barry putting his energy into work and stability. He wasn't orchestrating drama or fighting for control. He was simply there, dependable, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for the younger children who were still at home. Fans noticed the contrast. Kim seemed frantic, desperate, and constantly on edge. Barry seemed grounded, willing to let his kids breathe, willing to give them space. And this is where audience perception shifted sharply. Because while Kim was losing credibility, Barry was quietly gaining sympathy. It wasn't that Barry was perfect. His parenting had its flaws, and viewers pointed that out too. But compared to Kim's unraveling, his steadiness felt like a lifeline. He represented calm in a storm. He represented a parent who wasn't trying to weaponize every situation. And in a family so divided, that role mattered. The children seemed to sense it too. Even when their relationships with Barry weren't perfect, they leaned toward him in ways they no longer leaned toward Kim. Ethan, though still distant from both parents, often expressed that his frustrations with Barry didn't come close to the pain caused by Kim's control. Mariah spoke openly about her independence, but she also shared moments of respect for Barry's quieter approach. Micah, living his own life, seemed less at odds with Barry than with the parent who constantly tried to pull him back in. The show captured these dynamics in subtle ways, small gestures, quiet moments, side conversations where the children revealed where they felt safe, and every one of those moments chipped away at Kim's authority and built up Barry's image as the stable hand the family needed. Barry wasn't trying to win a popularity contest, but in the eyes of fans, he did. Social media lit up with comments praising his patience, contrasting his calm with Kim's chaos. Viewers empathized with him, calling him the anchor of the family, the one who quietly held things together when everything else was falling apart. That kind of public support mattered, because perception wasn't only shaping how fans felt, it was shaping how the family narrative was remembered. And here's what made it so powerful. Barry didn't have to do much at all. His strength came from what he didn't do. He didn't escalate fights. He didn't manipulate situations. He didn't turn his kids into pawns. He simply stood steady, and in doing so, exposed how much Kim was losing control. For Kim, this was devastating. She had spent years commanding the story, deciding what her children could do, framing herself as the center of the household. Now, not only were her children rejecting that role, but her husband, the man she had often overshadowed, was quietly emerging as the parent the world believed in. It was a role reversal no one could miss. The more Kim tried to force her authority, the more desperate she appeared. The more Barry kept steady, the more admirable he seemed. Fans began to root for him, not because he was flawless, but because his flaws were relatable, human, and not weaponized. And this is where the emotional weight lands. Because when children start leaning toward the quieter parent, the one who doesn't demand allegiance, it speaks volumes about where they feel safe. Barry's strength wasn't dramatic, but it was effective. And as Kim's grip slipped further, his calm presence stood in sharp relief. The family didn't see him as perfect, but they began to see him as trustworthy. And with Kim losing her grip, her public collapse was only a matter of time. For years, Kim Plath projected an image of control. She was the matriarch, the architect of the Plath family's strict, sheltered world. She was the woman who dictated every detail of her children's lives, from what they wore to what they believed, from the music they heard to the friends they could keep. On Welcome to Plathville, Kim wielded authority like a shield. But when her separation from Barry went public, when the divorce became reality, and when her carefully curated image was tested against the real-world consequences of her choices, the cracks that had once seemed small became undeniable. The cameras showed it. The audience felt it. Kim was no longer in control. She was unraveling. Her legal troubles only amplified the fall. Viewers who had watched the quiet collapse of her marriage suddenly saw the headlines. Kim Plath, arrested for DUI. The mugshot circulated online, a far cry from the polished mother-of-nine persona she had once carefully guarded. Fans connected the dots immediately. To them, this wasn't just a random misstep. It was the culmination of years of behavior that had always hinted at something darker beneath the surface. The arrest became a turning point. On screen, Kim had already lost her grip on the children, and off-screen, the legal fallout stripped away any remaining credibility she had left. She went from devoted mom to tabloid fodder almost overnight. And here lies the devastating irony. Kim once prided herself on keeping her children sheltered from what she called the corrupting influences of the outside world. Yet it was her own choices, her own rebellion against the life she had built, that exposed the family to public scrutiny like never before. Retention booster. It wasn't the show that destroyed Kim. It was Kim's own decisions playing out in front of millions. Viewers online didn't hold back. Discussion boards and fan groups lit up with speculation, with many drawing a direct line from the way Kim manipulated situations on camera to the way her real life had spiraled out of control. To some, her DUI arrest was proof that the controlling, holier-than-thou persona had always been a facade. To others, it was simply the tragic unraveling of a woman who could no longer maintain the image she once demanded everyone else live up to. And then came the questions about the network itself. Was TLC protecting Kim in earlier seasons? Did the show edit out darker moments that would have painted her differently? Fans dissected episodes frame by frame, pointing to strange cuts, awkward transitions, and storylines that seemed incomplete. Some argued the network had scrubbed parts of Kim's story to keep her marketable, to keep her as the central figure of drama without showing the full reality. Others believed the show had actually gone soft on her, worried that exposing her too much would collapse the series entirely. Speculation became part of the narrative. Fans weren't just watching Welcome to Plathville. They were investigating it, asking whether they had been misled about Kim all along. The more people talked, the more Kim's credibility crumbled. Because the story was no longer in her hands, she couldn't dictate what the audience believed. She couldn't control what her children were saying in their interviews. And she couldn't erase the legal record of her DUI arrest. Every headline, every comment thread, every social media reaction chipped away at the authority she once commanded. And here's the brutal truth. Once the audience turned, there was no going back. Kim wasn't just a mother fighting for control anymore. She was a public figure whose downfall was being dissected in real time. The fans who had once sympathized with her in early seasons were gone. The support she had relied on, the sympathy she had tried to cultivate, vanished. What was left was a collective reckoning. A conversation about whether Kim had been a victim of circumstance, or whether the show had simply exposed who she truly was all along. The contrast with Barry only deepened her isolation. He was seen as steady, grounded, even sympathetic. She was cast as erratic, manipulative, and increasingly reckless. The divide was so stark that fans began openly rooting for Barry while criticizing Kim, an inversion of roles that Kim could never have imagined back when she held all the power in the household. By the time the dust settled, Kim's public image was in ruins. Her authority as the matriarch had been shattered. Her credibility with the audience was gone. Her children, once her most loyal soldiers, were openly questioning her choices, and many had already walked away. This was the cost of trying to control everything. This was the price of making herself the center of every decision, every storyline, every fight. When her image crumbled, there was nothing left to shield her. And so, for the first time in her life, Kim Plath stood without allies. The woman who once dictated every rule in the Plath household now found herself standing alone. By the time the later seasons of Welcome to Plathville rolled across the screen, the story of the Plath children was no longer about their mother's rules. It was about their freedom. The very kids who had once been raised under lockstep control were now carving their own paths, determined to reclaim the years they had lost under the suffocating shadow of Kim's authority. Mariah, once the quiet daughter dressed in conservative clothes and forbidden from listening to secular music, exploded into independence. With her bright hair, bold fashion, and raw songwriting, she became a walking symbol of rebellion against her mother's rules. Every stage she stood on, every lyric she sang, carried the weight of defiance and of survival. Her career wasn't just about music. It was about reclaiming her voice from years of being silenced. Micah, too, stepped forward into a world his mother would never have approved of. Modeling, traveling, building his own life in front of the cameras, he became a figure of independence, carving out an identity far removed from the rural, rule-bound existence Kim had once tried to trap him in. His self-expression was his quiet revenge, every photo shoot a declaration that he belonged to himself now. Ethan and Olivia's journey was perhaps the most public and painful of all. Their marriage became its own battlefield, shaped in no small part by the legacy of Kim's control. Every argument, every step toward separation or reconciliation, echoed with the struggles of two young people who had been suffocated by Kim's rules from the very beginning. Their independence wasn't just about leaving the family. It was about learning how to live when the chains of control had already left scars. And yet, no matter how far they pushed forward, no matter how much success they tasted, the shadow of Kim's choices followed them. Fans could see it in their vulnerability, in the way they spoke about their past, in the moments when trust seemed harder for them than for anyone else their age. Kim's decisions, the 911 call, the custody battles, the attempts at control, had left a permanent mark. This is the lasting tragedy. The children's freedom came at the cost of their faith in their mother. And when that trust is broken in front of cameras, when it's dissected by millions of viewers, the pain doesn't stay private. It becomes part of the narrative of who they are. Retention booster. Because when a parent breaks trust in public, the wound is deeper, and the recovery lasts a lifetime. The audience felt it. Week after week, fans weren't just watching a family, they were witnessing the fallout of betrayal. The children's attempts to heal became a reflection of what happens when parental control goes too far, when boundaries are crossed, and when authority becomes manipulation. Viewers weren't simply entertained. They were moved. They saw themselves, their own families, their own struggles mirrored in the collapse of the Plaths. And yet, through all of it, one truth became undeniable. The children were stronger than the cage they had been raised in. Their independence wasn't just rebellion, it was survival. They had taken the pain of their upbringing and transformed it into something new. Something free, something hopeful, but the shadow of Kim's choices remains. Every decision they make, every career milestone, every relationship hurdle still carries echoes of the world she once forced them to live in. The cameras may fade, the episodes may end, but the legacy of her control lingers. And so we arrive at the emotional heart of this story, the reflection. What happens when the person you're taught to trust most becomes the one who betrays you? What happens when the mother who was supposed to protect you instead exposes you to pain, manipulation, and public humiliation? The Plath children are still answering those questions in real time. But their journey asks us, the audience, the same. And that's where you come in. If you followed this family, if you felt the shock of Kim's unraveling, if you've ever questioned what happens when control turns to betrayal, then share your thoughts below. How far should a parent's authority go? And what happens when it crosses the line? Because in the end, no matter how many seasons air, no matter how many headlines break, it all traces back to one moment. That 911 call. The moment everything changed. The spark that turned a private family battle into a public reckoning. And from that call forward, nothing in the Plath household was ever the same again.